So thank you very much, Kaveh. Also from my side, welcome. It's my pleasure and it's an honor to be here and to speak to you. Yeah, as mentioned, we have. Do we have the slides here as well? Yeah, my name is Ulrich Von Zanthier. I'm a director from KPMG Germany, and as Kaveh mentioned, I'm the lead partner for the financial services activities of the German practice in Iran. So the services that we bring in from Germany, as we heard, currently we have already resources on the floor here in Tehran, which we are very proud of. However, we need to in order to deliver all the projects that we ask for, we bring in resources also from Germany, and that's my task to organize this and to lead the team. My background is in banking and consulting for more than 20 years. I'm also doing projects in Germany, but as a major role, I have this role here in Iran. As mentioned, we've been here also from the German practice for more than, for even more than 3 years, because even in 2013 we have been here already talking to the central bank and holding workshops with them. But the real big activities started as mentioned, in 2016. Our main projects that we are doing are focused on issues that we need here, modernizing compliance functions, also modernizing risk functions, for example, implementing some of the Basel III standards, some of the international standards for Iranian banks. But also we work on topics like, we have this here, also we work on topics in order to interconnect the banking markets between Iran and Europe, which is on the one hand side establishing correspondent banking relationships. On the other hand side, we help Iranian clients to establish branches of banks in particular in Germany, but generally we would do this in other European countries as well. So that's our history, and so we have, at least compared to other Germans, to other Westerners, we think we have quite a long track record already with your market and have quite our experience. So we are now not talking about the specific banking interrelations, but about attracting capital. So one topic that we have also seen when talking to you, when talking to the clients, is that you look for additional funding sources. Of course, there is funding, but there is not sufficient funding, and you read it in every newspaper, and the government states it, that there's much more funding required, and the European capital markets would be an adequate source for that. So we have here some figures for that. There is not yet very much experience with it, but we're here to organize it. There's still, one has to acknowledge that there's still some challenges to this undertaking. The same is true for the establishing banking relations with Europe, and also with finding correspondent banks. And there are still, or we see still, hesitation. You are of course aware of in the European markets for several reasons, and these challenges or obstacles can be addressed from our point of view, and we are here also to help you with addressing it. So Kaveh mentioned already that there are compliance-related concerns. So, as you know, Iran is, of course, ranked as a high-risk country in terms of anti-money laundering by the FATF, and that's why Also, I read today in the newspaper, by the way, in the Financial Tribune here in Tehran, that the Central Bank of Iran is now asking all banks in Iran to establish independent compliance functions. And there are some elements that are required there, which are of international standards, so an independent reporting line, or the responsibility board for the compliance function. Generally, the independence of the function as such, which is great, and so there are measures that are taken, but still there's a way to be gone by the Iranian banks in order to address this issue. Beside the AML, there are of course still some sanctions in place, although most of them have been released. But as you know, there are still some European sanctions, but in particular also some American sanctions. And when you try to attract capital from Europe, you have to take the perspective of the Europeans and of the Westerners. So they will, of course, look at this, and they will take the definition of the entities, and they will stick to also the American rules. So what we together and you have to do is to help them to identify where the risks for them are regarding these sanctions policies. And one very important point about it is to identify the ownership structure of the corresponding companies, the legal ownership structures, but also the beneficial ownership structure. So what the investors and also the correspondent banks have to do is like a KYC, a classic KYC process. And we as advisors can also help you to arrange this, because what we see at the clients is it's sometimes very difficult to figure out who is influencing these companies. Many companies are very complex groups, and it's for us, even for us, very difficult to understand who's owner, who's beneficial owner. And you have to think of that the investor in Europe needs this information in order, first of all, because he's interested into, but in particular also because he has to be compliant with these international rules. There are also some challenges regarding financial transparency. We will have some more information on this on IFRS, so I will keep this short, but just as an information, if you want, for example, to get a listing at a, well, we hear more from Vienna according to this, but I know it from the Frankfurt Stock Exchange, you need a 3-year record of international annual reports. So in order to be accepted there, you need to introduce IFRS, and it's also important for the investors to understand what you are doing and to interpret your figures. There are still some concerns about the country risk. You know, there are at least no important external ratings so far from big international rating companies. I understand that there are some from smaller companies, and I understand also that there are some thoughts, you will elaborate on this later, Mr. Hinrichs, but there are some thoughts of establishing such, which would help a lot the international investment community to better estimate the risk when investing into Iran. Some minor issues, but still one has to think about it, is that at the moment it's very difficult to hedge the Iranian real. That's why at the moment when we talk to clients, we talk only about issuing bonds or loans in euros, not in real, but in the mid or long term, of course, you want to also issue in your own currency, and in that context, you should think about instruments, how to hedge the currency risk to make it easier for Europeans to invest. And a general point is there's a huge lack of experience of the investor community and also of the Europeans generally. So if you talk about Iran, they know very little about this country, about the all the circumstances. That's something we cannot address in a professional way, but we could just recommend talk, connect with Europeans, tell them what's going on here, liaise with them, and so on, in order to explain and to decrease a little bit the fear which is sometimes in Europe still existing. So when it comes to attracting foreign capital, there are different instruments. Most of the clients that we are talking to are asking for, in particular for debt instruments, and they're asking for structuring bonds. Actually, we will hear a little bit more later from our colleague from the Vienna Stock Exchange on bond and structured markets. Regarding a bond, there's of course always different options. There are different structures, different products that can be chosen. Also, there is of course the question whether it must be a listing in the first place, or whether you, for testing the market, you could also go for a private placement in the first place, and then in the midterm for a public listing. That's a range of topics we discuss here. Easier is, of course, a loan to structure. The requirements are much smaller if you just grant a loan. On the other hand side, it's a bit more difficult to find the investors. So there's a kind of trade-off between the complexity and the effort for fulfilling all legal and regulatory requirements for issuing a bond on the one hand side versus issuing loans. We have also had talks about equity instruments. Of course, you can also raise capital through issuing equities, be it an initial public offering or be it a dual listing. Also here, one should not underestimate the effort that is required for that. You need a formal approval application, excuse me, a formal application which is exactly to be written according to the European law. You need a comprehensive and very complex security prospectus, which is a huge effort. You need these annual reports. And some other formal requirements, which are, from our experience at the moment, for the status that we see, very difficult to reach, to be honest. And even if you succeed with it, afterwards you have to fulfill all the German regulations, like the securities law. You have to provide regular reports, you have to provide ad hoc reports, you have to fulfill many different regulations, insider dealing, etc., etc. So it is a challenge. It can be done, but it's not a task that can be done overnight. But it's a journey to go there in order to get the full access to all the instruments on the international markets. For two reasons. On the one hand side, because it's such a diversity of instruments. On the other hand side, that it's there are the obstacles that I mentioned. What we recommend, if you want to go to the European markets, is to start, and Kabe, you mentioned it in the very beginning, to start with a kind of feasibility study. So this would help you to, on the one hand side, to check what do you have, what information do you have that can be used for all these, for the prospectus or for all the application requirements, and also for the investor roadshows. On the other hand side, such a pre-study or feasibility study can help you with a sounding of the market, because until now we don't have, nobody has very good experience and benchmarks for Iranian clients on the European markets, because there hasn't been issued a bond until now. So it's very important to understand the investors' needs. I'm very glad that we have investors today here, so we can also discuss here a little bit. But if you want to go this step, and it's a huge step, a costly step, we strongly recommend to have a market sounding, to speak to investors first. What are their needs? What kind of products are they looking for? What kind of collateralization maybe they ask for? What kind of guarantees? What would be an idea, not the exact price, but an idea of risk premium that they expect for the country risk, for the compliance risk, etc. And only then, when you know what they want, then go for the next phase and for the preparation of for example, the bond issue, and then of course the execution. No need to say that we of course will be happy to help you with that. So we have experience on the market with lots of contacts there, deal advisory, debt advisory, as well as equity advisory is our core business, like the management consulting is our core business. So please approach us if you think about issuing and raising capital in Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ulrich. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Von Zanthier. It's nice to have you in Iran, Tehran. Thank you so much for supporting Iran. So my question would be, you talked about the listing, and that is a challenge, definitely it is. But how do we want to clear the problem with the clearing and settlement with Clearstream? That is a challenge too, since you must know that Clearstream is having problems with the states, USA, regarding Iran. So we have to settle and clear the bonds or the equities. How can we deal with that? Thank you so much.
Yeah, very good point. When I mentioned the banking relations, I mentioned only the corresponding banking, but of course, if you issue a bond, you need several services. You need the payment services, you need the custody, you need this, as you mentioned, the settlement. The major players in the market, the big players in the market are very hesitant due to the still remaining, in particular, one must say, to still remaining sanctions and their relation to the US. So for all these different services that make up the picture of the issue, we'll need to identify partners who are willing to support it. So we need, that's why we need this. Another reason why we need this feasibility study. We need to identify not only the investors, but we need to identify an investment bank. By the way, we are not an investment bank, we are just an advisor. We need to identify an investment bank who is prepared to do it. The big Americans won't do it, so we need smaller ones. We need a custodian to do it. We need settlement and so on. That's why we need the feasibility.
And Ulrich, that's exactly the approach we are applying here. First a feasibility study, and we take it step by step. So we don't go for the whole big, huge project, but take it step by step, right? I think we have a question. یه سوال اینجا داشتیم. اگه میتونید لطفاً میکروفون ردیف سوم چهارم برسونید. Right. شما اول. Just waiting for the microphone to move over.
Hi. Hello. Hi. Thanks for coming. I've got a different question. Considering the U-turn transactions being banned, being sanctioned, how would you envisage the fintech technology to contribute towards settlements and clearance, etc., etc.? The non-conventional methods, if you like. Thank you.
I'm not sure about that, but how do we arrange the settlement? Was that the question?
My question is that how would you envisage fintech technology, financial technology, new ways, unconventional ways?
You're not talking Bitcoin, are you?
To contribute towards clearing, settlement, etc. In terms of the money movement.
That might be an idea. To be honest, we didn't have that on our radar until now. But yeah, one could think about it. At the moment, we would rather go. We don't want to develop something for ages. We want in a reasonable time to reach the target. So we would go to the marketplace which are there, and they are probably they're not the big ones, international ones, as mentioned, but they are medium-sized or smaller ones that we would approach and try to solve these problems with solutions that are already there.
I think I fully agree. We're doing one step at a time. I'm hearing stories about Bitcoin in Iran and payment systems, a Turkish company doing something. I think you have to place your bets. What you do, you do one thing at a time. What we're doing right now is we're not going for HSBC, we're not going for Royal Bank of Scotland, we're also not going for Deutsche Bank. It's a waste of time, really. It's a waste of time, really. So what we're looking at is second-tier banks in certain countries, not in certain countries. We're not looking at the US. So that's what we're doing. But what you said, I think it sounds innovative, but we feel, as KPMG, we are rather going for the classic methods, which we hope will, give us some solution in a short or medium term. So no fintech. I think we had one, Masoud, huh? If you just grab the microphone and shout.
Good morning. My name is Masoud Gilani, Arjun Capital. I think the problem that we are all facing in Iran, and I've been doing investment banking in Iran since 2005. In fact, Dr. Rahbari was our due diligence advisor. I think, frankly speaking, it's a question of egg and chicken. Which comes first? In other words, you guys, the Western banks or Western financial institutions, tell the Iranian sponsors that fix up your balance sheet, show IFRS, show transparency, whatnot, and the Iranians say, first show us the money, right?
It's right.
So there has to be a happy medium ground. Otherwise, I can tell you this, why is it that when a Western institution, and I'm not going to mention that name of the institution, but I've been doing banking for a long time, so bear with me. When a Western institution makes an investment in a Chinese SOE, state-owned enterprise, you never really do that much due diligence as to whether it's Red Army or one of these communist party entities that is behind this company. But when it comes to Iranian entities, I'm sorry to tell you this, is it IR, Islamic Revolutionary Guards or whatnot? So I think so long as this case of talking past each other continues, not much is going to happen. And Iran, given my understanding of the GCC, Persian Gulf, and here, is not a corporate finance country. It's a project finance country. Meaning, most of the projects here need project financing, and most of it cannot come from Iranian banks because, unfortunately, Iran is one of those few rare nations where you have 32 banks. None of them is lending. They're essentially deposit takers. So long as Deutsche Bank or German development banks or the Japanese banks that do project financing don't come here, I don't think the situation with Tehran Stock Exchange trying to raise money to do a big project finance is going to be able to provide liquidity needed for a project finance specific country, which Iran is. Thank you.
Yeah, I cannot really contradict. There is a difference between the treatment of Iran and of Chinese. But there's complaining will not solve anything. I think there is between the black and white something gray in the middle. There is progress. I read also in the newspaper here in Tehran, by the way, I think yesterday, that the trade between the EU and Iran almost doubled last year. So up to $16 billion, it was stated in the Financial Tribune. I didn't check that figure, but it's probably right. So there is progress. There's almost doubling of trade finance. There is slowly, but one bank after the other who is opening their mind and going into correspondent banking. We have an Austrian representative. You know maybe that there's a significant bank in Austria, Oberbank, who's dealing with Iran, or has been dealing already for a long time. There's now, for example, in Europe, Danske. Danske is a really a big, important, huge bank, which is dealing now with Iran. There's a French bank, which name I forgot exactly. So there are already now some of the bigger ones coming. I agree, it could be faster, much faster, but don't forget that there's a very bad experience of fines, of sanctions. There's a very high regulation standard for, on the one hand side, the sanctions, but also the AML. So you have this double problem somehow in Iran. And don't forget there is still some kind of geopolitical things that are in the minds of the people. So my recommendation is be patient, but go forward. Even if you go forward slowly, you will reach your target.
Yeah, so maybe just one comment on yours. Of course, there's a chicken and egg, but I think if we just wait, for something to happen, probably nothing will happen. So really, we think, remember the slide that I showed you before, what the Iranian players should be doing. We think at least some basics must be done. Otherwise, it's waste of our time and their time and everybody's time. Talking IFRS, you don't have IFRS, just don't talk with us even. We are the intermediaries. So I think the very basics must be done, and that's absolutely an investment by the Iranian side. Period. Dubai did it. Dubai, before they got great, they invested a lot, and then they got great. I think there's the same story probably here. And as for financing, probably if you talk about the big banks, I think we're going to wait for them another X years. So what we're observing now in some cases as petrochemical, we're talking about consortiums, some European, some Chinese, Korean. So that is what is playing out right now, because you cannot get $2.5 billion by small and medium banks. It's just not going to work. You need consortium. That's our job to make that work. I think we'll take one more last question, because I want Thorsten, don't want to eat up too much of your time. ردیف اول دوم سوم در لباس آبی این جلو. میتونید لطفاً میکروفون اینجا. ردیف سوم این جلو. Third row, Patrick, in the blue shirt. دوستان آلمانی ما هنوز فارسی یاد نگرفتن.
Thank you so much for your nice speech. Actually, the question I have is kind of relative to the practical steps regarding attracting investing opportunities for Iranian project. Within the last 2 to 3 years, in a team that I was working in, loads of nice and lovely negotiations were handled through Iranian parties and the European counterparts in terms of financing for projects, mostly from Netherlands or Germany groups to Iranian ones. The projects were involved in petrochemicals, cold freeze, and very, very good projects with good opportunities and profits. The point is, the European counterparts didn't have any problem with IFRS systems or the other ways of financing. But when it comes to make a deal after even signing the MOU, they were looking only for one thing, sovereign guarantee. Although the Iranian parties were very welcoming to offer the alternative ways, like the other type of collaterals or bank guarantees, the Europeans were just insisting of sovereign guarantee. My question is that, based on your knowledge, I'm sure you have a good deep side knowledge of Iran as well. The National Bank of Iran has limited the number of projects allowed to be allocated the sovereign guarantee. So with that, this means that we can bring lots of cases that they are not allowed to receive the sovereign guarantee. However, what should we do in this case? We should not enter, we should not do the talk, or do you have any kind of other solutions in your mind? Thank you so much, and thanks.
Well, of course, I know the problem. We have the same discussions with our clients who seek capital. And I don't have a very easy solution, because, of course, if you take the perspective of the European, I always tell the Iranian side, what shall a collateral help if it's blocked in Iran, what should it help for collateralization for a European, for example, if it's a project and you take as a collateral a factory in south of Iran. I mean, an investor in Europe says, okay, what shall I do with it in case that the loan crashes? So they are not really interested into that. What's much better is, of course, a state guarantee, but if it's not feasible, at least another guarantee of a reputable company. So at least you decrease the probability of default, because you would need to see a double default in order to. So guarantees, from my perspective, are much better than at least collateral, which is here in the country. We have seen also a situation where there was a collateral property in the West collateralized. This is, of course, a very good collateralization, because for the Westerners, they can take it in case the loan is not performing or the bond is not performing. But to speak honestly, also this property is limited. You don't have unlimited property in the West, so you can. This is also limited.
I think thanks a lot.